Hey marketers, this is the Girls in Marketing podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in today. We are so excited to get started with the episodes. Just before we do, we want to give you a little introduction to who we are and what we do. Girls in Marketing is an e-learning platform and online community. We are on a mission to bridge the digital skills gap and equalise gender seniority in marketing. Right, that's enough chat. Let's get into the episode.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Girls in Marketing podcast. Today we are back with our much loved, well, by us anyway at least, snack episodes. And today we're going to be chatting all about creative CVs. I feel like creative CVs are something that so many people talk about, and it's something we've had multiple discussions on. So we have to make a snack episode about them because that's what these episodes are all about. Stuff that we care about, not necessarily anyone else. Hopefully other people do. So what actually is a creative CV? I feel like we should first define it before we go in and say anything about it.
Yeah.
What is a creative CV?
I mean, I guess it's quite a broad term, really, isn't it? I think anything that's not your kind of standard, conventional, what you think of as a CV, you know, your kind of black and white text-based, chronological order of experience kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, I guess the term's quite broad and covers off a lot of things, whether it's just more of like a visual version of your CV that's more kind of like graphic or design oriented, or something like really out there and nothing that you'd think of that would be used for a job application. Like, I don't know, creating a birthday cake style, you know, CV application with your experience on, or, you know, creating it in the style of a product of the company you're applying for or something like that. I think it's quite a broad spectrum, isn't it?
I was going to say, when I think creative CV, I think of like cakes, balloons, like products,
shoes,
that like, or like, you know, when people build these mad models of like The Office or something, and then they like put something, but actually a creative CV could be, like you say, something that's just visually designed differently, that's not on letter paper, that kind of thing.
I think at the end of the day, a creative CV can be whatever you want it to be, really, as long as it's showing off what you're trying to show off, like the skills you're trying to show off. Like, it might be, I don't know, you might send a cake to like I don't know, like a bakery business, bakery or whatever. It can be anything that you want it to be, and as long as it's showing off them skills, I think that's the main thing.
I think that's the issue, isn't it?
I was going to say, how do we
100%.
feel about them? How do we feel about them? Are we pro creative CVs, like pro the extravagant kind of ways of getting your message and your values across? Or are you a bit more like, maybe just the standard letters, okay?
Yeah, I think I'm a bit in between, because I know Kira just said if it's relevant and if you can make your skills relevant, but I think a lot of the time it's not. I remember a while ago I seen a job ad for like a fast fashion brand who will not be named. I can't actually remember which one it was anyway, so that doesn't matter.
They who will not be named.
And they said they wanted a creative CV, and some people sent like crazy things like balloons where you pop it and then it comes out with all like their experience and stuff, and, you know, cakes and all stuff like that. And it's kind of like, does that actually show
That
the
is the
skills
issue
for a
with
fast
them.
fashion brand? Maybe if it was like a dress with like all of their experience on, that maybe.
How would you do that?
I don't know.
I'd like to see that.
How would that work?
I also think, though, I totally agree. I think if it's relevant, maybe, but I also wonder whether that's asking just far too much for people at an application stage. Like, literally the first thing that they want from you could be, you know, something like as far as you say, creating like a garment of clothing with your experience on. And people probably
That was a bit
think,
far from me.
but even still, like, I'm sure people probably do it. And I think if it's, you know, a big brand name and people think, okay, there's going to be thousands going for this, I need to stand out.
Yeah.
The amount of time, because that's not like, you know, you could create that CV and then you could go away and apply for 5-10 jobs with it. That's a one-time only job application. You're
And
not
you spend
repurposing
all
that.
your time on this application, and then if your balloon doesn't get popped, you don't get noticed. Do you know what I mean?
Or it gets
It's
lost
like-
in the post. Every time I see these
God,
things, I'm like,
yeah.
oh my goodness, what if these things get lost in the
If the
post?
cake
Have you
gets
got track
smashed?
delivery? Have you got insurance on this item?
Is it
Because
signed
it's like,
for?
yeah, and you see these graduates like actually paying money to like purchase materials and items to make all these things, and I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
commitment for sure, and I'm so impressed by some of them, but you're right, if
100%.
it's not relevant or, you know,
Yeah.
you never hear back from that company,
That
it is.
is
it's
100%
disheartening.
where
It
the
is disheartening.
relevancy comes into it, and
Yeah.
that's when it gets all extravagant, and it's like who can get noticed the most, and it's just that's when it like the relevancy and the skills kind of get lost in everything, doesn't it?
100%. And even, I think even kind of some of the CVs that aren't quite as out there as like clothing or shoes or, you know, literally whatever it might be. Even I find sometimes that certain CVs that are like still paper-based or, you know, digital, but they're kind of like, you know, very colourful with loads of different like fonts and like, I don't know, maybe backgrounds and logos and like pictures of yourself and like your name that takes up like half the page and stuff like that. Like sometimes I kind of feel like, again, they're so dependent on the role. And if you're trying to demonstrate your creativity, if it's a creative role and maybe you want to align it, I don't know, with like the brand kind of look and feel or something like that. But I think that a lot of people, I think more recently as they've become a bigger thing, fall into that trap of just kind of creating these kind of creative CVs because they think they have to, especially a lot of the time, kind of people who maybe are looking for their first role so they don't have experience of creating any other type of CV that has maybe been successful before. And I think that actually, if you think about it from the other side as the employer, if you're getting CVs in for a role that's not a creative role, you're probably expecting to get not like standard boring CVs, but CVs that are just kind of more evidencing your kind of fit against the job description criteria. And it can be a lot harder to decipher that if you're trying to pick it out from like bubbles of text and like bits of colour and things like that. So I think if it's relevant, it's great. But I think sometimes you could potentially be putting yourself at a bit of a disadvantage by going above and beyond. And some employers might think, actually, that's not what we're looking for.
Yeah, or in some cases attracting the wrong type of employer for you, because it might be the case that if this particular employer is wowed and really super impressed by these extravagant CVs, which yes, maybe they should be, but do they have all the stuff beneath that, you know, the strategy, and are they impressed by those like fundamental values of the marketing role or whatever kind of role it may be? So that, do you know what I mean? So it might be the case that is the employer actually the right one for you if they're impressed by this kind of craze that's happening. Actually, do you go for someone who's...
And is that employer the right employer for you if you need to do all this massive stuff? Yeah. So asking you then, Olivia, as an employer,
Nice segue.
What's kind of your opinion on creative CVs? Have you received any, or do you expect any?
No, I definitely don't expect any, but I don't really think I've ever had any like super out of the box ones. I've had like people who've maybe made like a PowerPoint presentation or something like that, which maybe is a bit more creative than a typical kind of like CV standard doc, but never really had anything that's like a balloon or a cake or anything like that. And I don't really know how I would feel about it, to be honest. I think if it had happened, maybe I could speak from more of experience. But I just think you can't really put your experience on, a cake or something like that. You can only put so much onto it, can't you? And also I would feel almost obliged to kind of give them an interview or say, oh, you can come in. And maybe that's how other people feel, is that it's like, actually this experience isn't relevant and this person probably wouldn't fit in the company, but they've went out their way and they've created this, you know, balloon, and I feel really bad for them and I'll just let them come in. And then it's almost kind of like, are you then being almost kind of like pushed along into a role that maybe you wouldn't suit, or, you know, as you said, Martha, you wouldn't necessarily really align with the values of. I think it's a really difficult one, and toxic CVs in general I think are quite... Creative CVs in general are quite toxic. I was literally about to say, I called them toxic CVs, but I meant creative CVs.
I was like, what is a toxic CV? Like a fake persona or something, like they're just sending them in to catfish employers.
I think they're toxic. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, if it goes beyond a PowerPoint, it becomes so inaccessible. That's another thing I seen a LinkedIn post ages ago that was saying it's so inaccessible, because if you think about a cake, I know obviously you've got to bake it, but you've got to buy all the ingredients to make it. If you are printing your experience, you've got to like print it on special paper. You've got to like use it, buy icing, like all these different things. I know I'm teaching people how to bake a cake. But also like if you're going to do, I don't know, a balloon, like it's a lot of money, and it's kind of like, should you be spending your money minimum, you know, £20 on a CV, as you guys said before, that is literally just a job application.
And you might not even hear back from them. I think that's the issue when it's like a company hiring for a job and they want a creative CV. That's the issue that comes into it. Then it's like,
So in terms of creative CVs then, I know we've talked a lot about kind of some of the reasons that maybe we don't necessarily agree with them in certain instances. Do you think that there are occasions when, you know, they are a great idea? I think personally, I'd say that when they first kind of came about, I know that we see a lot of them nowadays, they're talked about a lot, but I think in the very early days of people creating these creative CVs and really thinking outside the box, I do think that it was kind of like they had that wow factor, didn't they? And, you know, that shows real kind of creativity and a real sense of, you know, I know that I want something so bad that I am going to put the effort in to go above and beyond. And if it's your choice and you've done that off your own back and it's like a really original idea, I think that they're great. And I don't think that this episode, you know, should discourage anyone who thinks that, you know, it's something they really want to do. And particularly if it's for a role that you think's, you know, very competitive. I kind of keep thinking, I know you said a dress and I know that was probably quite extreme, but I kind of keep thinking, is it necessarily kind of marketing roles that these things are more appropriate for? Or is it more things like, I don't know, like things that are super competitive, like fashion jobs or I don't know, like are they
those
more
design heavy roles?
Where there's like it's really, really heavily competitive, because it's not to say that obviously marketing roles aren't competitive and, you know, you really don't like have to stand out or anything like that, but I wonder if they've got a better fit in maybe slightly other like industries or types of role.
I feel like often it's bigger brands definitely than kind of smaller companies. I don't think you're going to be sending like a cake for a marketing role for like Bob's Builders next door. Do you know what I mean?
They might enjoy it.
Yeah, they might love it. Yeah, probably. But it's more kind of the bigger companies
to get noticed by the household name brands.
Yeah.
I think that's almost what they were invented for, wasn't it? It's so that like people who are fresh out of uni can get noticed by these huge brands and like get offered, which I think is amazing because it did work, and so people are landing opportunities like that. And I do think there is a place for them. Almost back to what you were saying about expecting applicants to do these extravagant CVs so early on. I think there is a place for them, but maybe later on in that process. Like even in marketing, sometimes employers ask people to create tasks and things like that. And I kind of think that's the phase to go crazy with it. You see people creating like mini websites and QR codes and like virtual like Snapchat filters and all these things. And I think that is so cool. And to be able to showcase those skills within the task element of the application process is amazing, but maybe just save that like stuff to the bit where you know that it's gonna see a little bit of return. As we say, you might not hear back from people. So I do think there is a place for it. Just maybe it's like picking the time where you think, okay, that's worth my time. That's worth money if I have it to spend on these things to do that.
I did see a cool creative CV, like by someone applied for Rise at 7, and it was an advent calendar, and it was on the lead up to Halloween, which is quite relevant actually.
Nice.
I'd
love an advent calendar for Halloween. That's my dream advent calendar with a little pumpkin spice candle or something in each day.
It was really cool. It was like because she said Halloween's her favourite like time of year, you know.
Respect it.
Like yourself, Martha.
Join the club.
Favourite time of year. And she said, so it was like a build up to that. I can't remember how many like little slots it was, but it was quite a few. And then I think because she'd been rejected a few times, she'd done like a normal kind of CV and stuff, and she'd been rejected a few times, and she was like, you know what, I'm just gonna go a bit out there, like try this. And she hand delivered it like to their office. This was a while ago now. And then she ended up like getting a role and stuff like that. So I think that was quite different. And I mean, I know that baking a cake or balloon or whatever, that's different as well. But I think she related it to herself because it was like little tiny pockets, and every day they learned a little bit more about her, you know, what she was like, who she was. I don't know if they got pumpkin spice candles, unfortunately, but I know that it was like advent kind of style, which is, it was quite cool idea, I thought.
That's really cool.
And I think that is something that, okay, maybe it's not accessible and maybe it is kind of leaning towards that like toxic creative CV kind of vibe. But I just thought personally it was cool, and I don't know if that would make me want to hire someone or not, but it would definitely get my attention and kind of go, oh, this is quite cool, especially if you were someone who likes Halloween or you kind of read it and it was like, you know, there's cool copy on like the postcard and stuff like that. So it's almost kind of like, how do you make it relevant? But again, if it's not relevant to the role, if you're applying for like an analytics or a data role, like it's never going to be relevant, is it? But this was more of like an intern, like no experience type of role. So I do think it really depends, and it just depends on the company and also yourself and kind of your experience and stuff.
Yeah. And I think for me, an organisation, I don't think should be asking for you to create them unless there is like like we said, it's like a really niche specific creative role where like by creating that CV, you are actually demonstrating your eligibility. Like, you know, say if it was you actually were applying to be like head dessert chef or whatever at a restaurant and they said bake us a cake and that is your application because we're going to judge you on the cake. Okay, fine. But if it's like, oh, you're going to be our social media manager, do a creative CV. And it's kind of like, okay, but is this necessary? Like, can I not just tell you like the experience I've got in social, show you like the Instagram account that I currently run, like actually demonstrate what I currently do and create maybe like a portfolio of my work? Would that not be a better use of my time? And then also you can use that portfolio for other roles as well.
Yeah.
I just think if it's demonstrating your actual eligibility, then there's a difference, isn't there?
Because it's almost that thing of like, you can talk the talk, can you walk the walk? It's kind of like that show, don't tell element of it.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
Maybe something that would be more creative on a more positive note rather than us just going in on like toxic CVs. Something that maybe is more accessible is the kind of digital creative element. I've seen a few people recently making like TikToks and kind of doing like a whole TikTok, what's it called? Like a whole TikTok
like profile page.
Yeah, like a page dedicated to a job. And I know a few people went like viral with it and it was like, hey TikTok, like I'm applying for this role, like let them see me. And I think someone did it to apply for TikTok. I can't remember what her name was, but I'm pretty sure she did it ages ago and it was to apply for a role at TikTok. So she made a TikTok page, made all loads of videos and it went like viral and then TikTok seen it. And, you know, I thought that was really, I think that is really
cool.
accessible.
And I think again, like you say, it's more accessible. It's like, you know, you can spend some time on it, but you know it's not going to take up loads of time. You're showing your skills. I did a similar thing, almost, kind of. So I applied for a role. It was like with an influencer. So it was in that social media space. So it was super important kind of to demonstrate social skills. And what I did was like, I just utilised the close friends list and I kind of like did a few like demonstrated the tasks and like my experience in that close friends list. So only that influencer could see it, but it meant that they could go onto the Instagram page, have a scroll through and that was my way of interacting. But again, that wasn't the application phase. I did that in the task phase when I already knew that I like got through a certain amount of rounds and then I chose to kind of demonstrate those skills a little bit later on.
And
it worked.
And I think that that's relevant again, isn't it? And like you say, Liv, with someone creating a TikTok account, like a profile solely dedicated for a role at TikTok, you're kind of demonstrating your ability on TikTok, if that makes sense. Or say you're applying for like a social media role at a company and you're getting their attention by showing them you can use social media. It's still kind of relevant. It's within the realms of kind of like being relevant to the actual job itself. So I don't necessarily think creative CVs are a problem. I just think that they have to be relevant. They have to be warranted. You have to be able to justify people spending that time. And, you know, by all means, if you want to spend your time creating them, then like definitely go ahead and do it. I think it's also more like kind of the less creative CVs, if that makes sense. So the ones where like you can kind of like find templates of them and like you can put your current CV into just something that's like bright and colourful and things. And I don't have an issue with them as like a concept. What I would say is like a lot of the ones that I've seen, people actually often disadvantage themselves by kind of like filling half a page of their CV with like an image of themselves and like the headline and their name. And I'm like, that's great. But actually, one, they might want to filter your name out of the application stage anyway. They might not want to see an image of you. And also you're limiting the stuff that you can say about yourself, like the actual powerful, positive things that you've achieved, things that can actually secure yourself the job. So yeah, I think sometimes people doing that, they think that the creative side is what people are looking for, but they actually then take away some of the stuff like the meatier experience that the employer actually needs to see. So it's just getting that balance right with those, I think.
Yeah, I think that's another thing, isn't it? We've talked creative CVs more from like extravagant creative CVs, but also people see adding a bit like a splash of colour and that sort of thing also is creative. Personally, I wouldn't say that is a creative CV, mainly because it's just adding a bit of colour to your current one. I don't think there's a problem with it. I just don't think it's necessarily gonna kind of put you at any advantage or disadvantage along with anyone else. You know, if your CV goes through an ATS system with a big company, all that's going to be filtered out anyway, as you said, Amy, and especially if they're along the lines of like the Equality Act and stuff, a lot of people take out names, take out pictures, all that sort of thing. So it's kind of like, are you actually making more of a hurdle for yourself? Because actually you could have used that all that page for extra additional information about you rather than a picture. I know that in the UK in particular, for employers and stuff like that, actually pictures aren't relevant, but I know some European countries it's a bit more kind of normalised to have a picture on your CV. But I get so many questions all the time, like, should I add a picture, should I not? And I do think it's personal preference, but if it takes up like half the page, I often think maybe it's not super relevant.
Yeah, I think a CV, like any space on your CV, whether you do one side, whether you do two, whatever, everything is like prime real estate.
Yeah, it's like gold dust.
100%. And I think realistically, you know, if you're getting the right stuff in your CV, you should be looking to like cram it down to like as little as possible. You should be like kind of thinking, what on earth can I possibly take out? Rather than thinking I can afford to give up 2/3 of a page to like a name and a picture. Like I just think of like how important that space is. And that's my kind of personal.
So I would say that wraps up the episode on creative CVs before we keep channeling on this rant about creative CVs. But it would be great to know from everyone out there what everyone thinks of it, because I feel like maybe we should have a bit of a discussion. We might start one on Instagram stories or something to get people like chatting about it, because I always think it's so interesting. Obviously none of us have like a massive experience with them, maybe in more of a lesser sense, but sometimes if there's people out there that have created them, it'd be really interesting to know.
It'd be good to hear like success stories, maybe not so successful stories. Definitely be good to hear them.
Right, that marks the end of another great episode. We really hope you enjoyed tuning in today, and if you did, please share with your friends, rate us on Apple Podcasts, follow us on Spotify, and watch the video version on YouTube. We've got so many exciting things coming, so we really love for you to get involved. See you soon.